Hey guys, welcome back to Reignited and welcome back to another episode of Ask a Tech. You can see we've changed our environment here. We have a beautiful backdrop here today. And let's get straight into it with the question that's on the thumbnail. Now, Michael Petruccelli, I'm not really sure which, he says, what are your thoughts on an oil catch can? Some people say it's a must-do, and I've read it's completely unnecessary. So I'm curious as to what you think about it. Michael, you're trying to get me in trouble here. For whatever reason, the catch can issue is a hot button topic within the Mopar community, and I'm not really sure why. Now, I have some very firm thoughts about it myself. I have my own opinions. However, I want to make sure I did some proper research on this one and figure out what the potential benefits could be. Now, that being the case, I went ahead and typed up an entire page here of information, and I want to go over that information now. First thing I want to start with, what are the potential benefits of running a catch can setup? Now, the vast majority of people, when they try to explain to me how their catch can is doing such great things for their engine, they always say to me that after X amount of miles, look how much oil is in here. There's 3-4 ounces of oil in here. And now that's oil that otherwise would have gone right into my engine. And my response to that is, and? Because that's how the system's designed. From the factory, it's designed to do that. Is that really an issue? I'm not going to call that a benefit because to me, you're not really affecting anything mechanically within the engine. Now, the second thing people say is, well, it keeps your intake runners clean and you don't have that gunk building up in your intake manifold. Okay, that is a fair point. It does keep that stuff from happening. However, let me ask you this. If you ran your vehicle for 100,000 miles and then you put an oil catch can on there, did it clean those intake runners? Did it clean your intake manifold? No, it didn't. It didn't change anything about what was already there. It just prevented more of that buildup from happening inside the engine. Now, is that really a benefit? I don't really think so either. Again, you're not affecting the mechanical operation of the engine by doing that. So again, that was kind of my firm thoughts about a catch can and really why exactly would you want to put it on your vehicle. But I wanted to dive a little bit deeper. So I found a website here and it's from comeanddriveit.com. It had some great information there about detonation specifically, and I want to read you a little excerpt from that. He says, an issue particularly troublesome on high RPM and high boost motors is aerated oil vapor being blown back through the intake tract via the PCV system. Now, this oil has significantly lower auto ignition temperature and will ignite early, causing detonation in sufficient volumes. Now, in modern vehicles, the PCV is routed back to the intake tube where these blow-by vapors are consumed by the engine. Typically, this is not an issue, but in sufficient volumes, it can be. Now, this is why catch cans are installed on performance engines, which are particularly prone to these issues. All right, I want to clarify something here. The key points here are high RPM and boost engines. Now, some of you might say, well, my RT vehicle, my Hemi vehicle is a performance engine straight from the factory. And that is true to an extent. It is definitely a higher performance than your standard vehicle. However, what he's talking about here is engines that are extended running at high RPM or that have been forced induction, something of that nature. Both of those scenarios are ripe for an excessive amount of PCV. Now, in that case, I would absolutely recommend a catch can system because you're already creating excess pressure. However, let me tell you, if you have a brand new Hemi engine with only about 20,000 miles on it, the amount of PCV you're creating is negligible. So in my mind and in my opinion, if you have a stock or even a mildly upgraded Hemi engine, a catch can is not affecting you in any way. Now again, if you're one of those who says, I've got to have my intake tracks clean, my intake manifold clean, well, if you buy new cylinder heads and a new intake manifold and then put a catch can on, more power to you. I understand that. You'll keep it clean from that point going forward. But I just don't see the benefit on installing a catch can on even a mildly modified Hemi engine. They're not going to create enough excessive PCV. And let's also be clear here too, that these oil vapors in the engine that could potentially cause detonation, there's about 100 other things that affect detonation more so than that. This is way down on the list, guys. This is one of those things where you're looking at the very minute things when you should be looking at the major things. So there it is. Those are my personal thoughts on whether or not you should install a catch can on your vehicle. I have no doubt that's going to be controversial and so many people are going to reply on here and say, absolutely they make a difference. And you know what? That's absolutely fine. It is your vehicle. You do what you want with it. That's the whole point, isn't it, right? We do the modifications that we think make a difference and who cares? It's no one else's vehicle but our own. All right, let's move on to the next question here. Maniac FPV says, I have a 2010 Challenger RT with 150,000 miles. Would it be worth it to sink some money into upgrading it, like a slight cam and supercharger running about 8 PSI with a tune? Love the car and would like a little bit more power, but I'm not sure if I should just do it or get a car with lower miles to work on. You know, that is a good question, and I have to say that 95% of Hemi engines I've ever worked on with 150,000 miles look exactly the same as ones I've taken apart with 10,000 miles. They're a very solid engine, very reliable. I don't see any issue whatsoever with installing a cam and supercharger on a Hemi engine with 150K miles on there. Is there some other auxiliary things you'd want to do? Maybe replacing the timing chain setup on there or something like that? Absolutely, but those are just things that you'd want to do anyway. But with that kind of mileage, I'm not concerned about it at all. All right, our next commenter question, I'll be honest, I don't have any idea how to pronounce your name. If you can message me and let me know exactly how to say your name or something close to that, that'd be great. He says, have you tried a Challenger 5.7 with a manual? Is it a fun enough car or it's better to choose a 6.4? Also, what would you prefer as a second car? And he says he tried the 3.6 and it disappointed him. I can understand that. You know, I think the 5.7 with a manual is a really fun car. However, in my opinion, I would absolutely spring for the 6.4 because it's not just the power difference. The 6.4 cars are set up to be a little bit stiffer, a little bit more of a driving experience than the 5.7s. The 5.7s are pretty tame. So I think it absolutely makes sense to go with the 6.4 liter. As to your second question, what would I prefer as a second car? Well, I'm not sure if you guys have noticed too much in the background, but I actually am a huge motorcycle fanatic. That is what I absolutely love to do. I'm a sport bike guy. I love to ride sport bikes. I have a ZX-10R, I have a CBR 954RR, and I also have a cafe bike that I built. If you go back to the channel, you'll see a bunch of different motorcycle builds that I've done in the past. Motorcycles are a huge passion of mine, so that is my second car as a motorcycle. Next question comes from Thomas Hilliard. He says, I have a question. I've heard of people swapping out the mechanical fan on the Ram 1500 for an electric fan. Have you seen this or have you ever done this? Why or why not would you recommend? Now, this is something I have heard about fairly recently, and in fact, there's a guy, he has a channel, I think it's called Boosted Motorsports, and he actually has some great videos about this. Now, what they're doing here is they're removing the stock mechanical fan and they're replacing it with the electric fan, electric cooling fan from the V6 models. Now, what's interesting is on the Hemi engine, you have your mechanical fan, but you also have the auxiliary electric fan inside the cooling shroud itself. So you would think, if I have a mechanical fan already, and then I have an auxiliary cooling fan, why would you want to change that to a single cooling fan that may not give you enough cooling force? However, here's the difference. When you swap to that V6 cooling fan, you get rid of that parasitic drag on the front of the engine. Definitely a good choice. And that V6 fan is designed to cool the entire thing to begin with, and it pulls a lot of CFM, significantly more than the electric fan that comes stock in those engines. One of the things that we have to know is that when you put that cooling fan in there, and it has to be a certain specific model, a year range from the V6s to actually bolt up and plug in. But one thing to keep in mind is that factory fan in Hemi is not going to come on until either your AC is activated or you reach 215 degrees. So obviously we'd want our cooling fan to come on a little bit before that. Thus, you'd have to get a tuner of some kind to where you can turn on the cooling fan at a lower temperature. So that's one change you would have to make if you went to this swap. Now, one of the pros about it is that it actually can provide improved airflow to the AC condenser, which leads to better AC operation. Like if you're sitting and idling for an excessive period of time in traffic or something like that, your AC is actually gonna work a little bit better because this electric fan is drawing through a greater amount of air than the factory one would. I think that's a kind of an interesting side benefit. As far as whether it's strong enough to keep it cool, I think it is. I think this was actually a very interesting swap, and it's something I would be interested in doing next time I get a 4th gen in my shop. So, or is it 5th gen? I can never remember which is which. All right, Mike Trejo says, what are your thoughts on Plastigage for bearing clearance? You ever use it on one of your rebuilds? Yes, I have. I have no issues with using Plastigage. To be honest, the actual Pro tools for measuring everything, your micrometers and your bore gauges and all of that, to be honest, they're actually a little bit finicky to use correctly, and I've seen people make more mistakes using the correct tools than just using the cheaper tools like Plastigage. Now, Plastigage is not foolproof, and honestly, it can be a little funky to use that as well. Trying to figure out the correct graphing after you've compressed it can sometimes be a little bit tricky, but to be honest, I have absolutely no issue with Plastigage. I think for 99% of scenarios, it's gonna get you in the ballpark close enough to where you can feel comfortable assembling the engine. Now, if we were building race engines here and they were making thousands of horsepower, obviously that's not a scenario in which I would recommend that sort of thing. You'd have to go to a professional engine builder for that. But for home use, Plastigage is great. All right, Mark Miller, this is a long one here. He says, I've got these trouble codes P219A, which is left-hand bank AFR or air fuel ratio not within limits on my 14 Chrysler 300C 5.7 Hemi. Nothing wrong with the engine. After extensive troubleshooting, including pulling the left-hand bank valve cover to inspect the valve train, car gets 25 miles per gallon consistent on the highway, and the code only sets after 250 to 350 miles of long-distance driving. Now this started when the JBA shorty headers were installed. I have a sneaking suspicion that O2 sensors are placed wrong in the headers, although right-hand bank is fine. Real-time running with my Autel diagnosis scanner showed normal reads for everything, including fuel, long and short trim, well within limits, even on a freeze frame. Engine has 66,000 miles on it and has great compression in each cylinder, and leak down is well below 10%. Fuel pressure is 55 to 63 psi as per factory spec, and spark plugs and coils were replaced with iridium tip plugs and Pertronix coils. I also electronically shut off the MDS system, as the factory RT exhaust I use drones horribly with it activated. Injectors were swapped between banks to see if trouble followed the injectors. No luck. This car has many other performance or bolt-on performance stuff, and it all worked great with no check engine lights until the shorty headers were installed. I can clear the code and do 3 start-stop sequences, and the code is cleared by the PCM, and it will never set this code driving around town. Now, there's a TSB that supposedly addresses this problem with a reflash for software updates and $145 out of my pocket, but he's trying to avoid visiting the dealership due to custom tunes loaded in the car. Different tunes did nothing to solve the issue, and the car runs great even with check engine light on. Any ideas? Mark, I gotta say, you were very thorough and you covered most of the things I would have talked to you about. So I think in this situation, the only 2 things I kind of keyed in on was that you said that the issue only showed up after you installed these shorty headers on there. So the 2 things I would mention is, 1, if you have even a very, very minor exhaust leak, you can have this issue. Like you said, it only happens after a certain length of time, while the computer is seeing something over that period of time that it doesn't quite like. So if you have even a very, very minor exhaust leak, maybe something to do with the header gaskets on there, then that could cause this code. Now the second thing is, now this is something that I've seen in the factory side as well. Now you mentioned that this code takes like 250, 300 miles to set. That means that it's very, very minor circumstances that are setting this code. So my suggestion would be, you say you already have custom tunes on the car. If you go to whoever did those custom tunes and have them redo the tune just a little bit to kind of take that sensitivity down for that specific code, that would be really your best option, because clearly there's nothing actually wrong with the vehicle. It's not actually running poorly or anything like that. It's only setting this code under a certain minor variance. So if you can get them to desensitize that just a little bit by writing that into the tune, you should be good to go with no issue. This happens in the factory quite a bit, actually. We have flashes that we end up redoing that desensitize things because they set codes when they shouldn't be, because they're being too sensitive with it. So that's my only suggestions I have. All right, next question. Chuck Rice says, are pedal commanders worth the $300? And if I am leaving the Hemi as stock? And would the mid-muffler delete void the warranty or cause any sensor issues on my 2020 Challenger RT Shaker 6-speed Tremec? First of all, awesome car. That's a great car, super fun to drive. As far as the pedal commander goes, yes, in my opinion, it is absolutely worth it, because it's all about driving experience, especially with a vehicle like that. And from the factory, they're pretty soft, to be honest. The pedal response just really isn't there to what you would expect out of a performance engine, right? So in my case, that 392 powered C10 I've got, it's running a Holley Terminator, and it's essentially, you can program the pedal to read whatever you want at whatever you want. So I have it as a direct 1-to-1 ratio. So whatever I give the pedal, that's what the engine is going to give me. Man, it wakes it up. It makes it so much snappier. I absolutely love it. So yes, I do think a pedal commander is worth it. Now to answer your second question, a mid-muffler delete would not void any sort of warranty at all. It is after the catalyst, so you can change that with no issue, no worries, and it won't affect anything sensor-wise as well. You're good to go with deleting that. All right, next question comes from Eric Conway. He says, as you are aware, 2nd and 3rd generation Dodge Hemis run hotter than 1st gen Hemis. I don't feel comfortable having my Dodge Challenger Hemi running at 215 or 220 degrees. Besides replacing the thermostat with a 180-degree thermostat and tuning the ECM to have the fans come on at 180, 190 degrees, what else could be done to cool the Hemi engines more? You know, Eric, I've actually seen a lot about this lately. A lot of people have switched to that 180-degree thermostat. And in the short term, switching to that thermostat can help. However, you have to remember that the volume of coolant in the system remains the same. So at a certain point, it's all heat soaked enough to where that temperature is going to start to creep back up again. And the factory fans sometimes are not quite enough to keep that down. Now, my thoughts on the cooling system are you have three main things. You have volume, you have surface area, and there's CFM. So the volume of the system can only be changed by adding maybe a thicker core radiator or something like that. And even with that, you're still only going to alleviate the problem a little bit. Now, surface area is the second one, but obviously we're limited by space, right? Our radiator can only be a certain size. You can improve airflow to the radiator by removing some other components, but those are all ones you want in there, like a condenser, things like that. Now, the last one is CFM, and I think this is the one that has the most opportunity to really improve the cooling system. Now, even if you have a tuner to turn the fans on at a lower temperature, those fans are only capable of allowing a certain amount of CFM drawing through the radiator. If you upgrade to higher CFM fans, I think that's going to do more than anything else as far as keeping your temperatures low and in the range that you're actually looking for. Now, having said that, I do want to point something out here, and that is that engineers designed this engine to run at 215, 220 degrees. And anytime you try to change something from the way an engineer designed it to operate, it doesn't quite operate as well as it did before. So what I'm saying is, even though we're probably not comfortable with it running at 215, 220 degrees because we're used to things running at 180 degrees, you could bang on this thing all day long, beat on it, and 220 degrees is as hot as it's gonna get, and it's gonna run perfectly at that temperature each and every day. So honestly, I don't really feel it's necessary to change that unless you are running a really high performance engine, something that's putting out almost double what the factory would, something like that. That makes more sense to really address the cooling system. But anything where you have just mild bolt-ons, I think 215, 220 is absolutely nothing to be concerned about. All right, our last question for this video comes from Ethan Straight. He says, my question is about your tech training. What are the biggest things you took away from schooling, and what do you think could have been improved? I'm starting a job with a local fleet repair company, and they offer to pay for tech schooling to become a tech, and would appreciate any other advice you think would be helpful for someone entering this field of work. Ethan, that's a fantastic question. You know, I'm always happy to talk about any sort of a tech training situation. For myself personally, I was actually working at the Chrysler dealer, and then I was sent to Chrysler training school. And it's not like a specific, like you spend so many months doing this school. They're basically a day or 2 day courses that you get sent out to when they are available. So you work for a while, go to some courses, then you work and go to some courses. Unfortunately, the only issue with this setup is that your technical training is only going to be as good as your instructor. Now, in my case, I had some fantastic instructors. There were some really good ones. Now, of course, there were some bad ones as well, but the majority of them were good. And one in particular, Mark Scott, he just really imprinted on me the importance of what it is that we're doing, and you could tell how much he cared about you as an individual and trying to teach you these things. Now, the biggest things that I took away from this tech training is that there's things you need to know and things that are just fluff, and it's about trying to differentiate those things because, you know, I'll say this, okay, as an example. So I was a transmission tech for a very long time. Now, part of our technical training involved fluid flow charts, essentially showing us which way the fluid travels inside the transmission. I will tell you, in 11 years of doing this, I never once looked at one of those charts. Because quite honestly, I'm not an engineer. It doesn't really matter to me how that works. Now, the primary thing that I use is a little chart that says what's on when, what components are engaging and what components are disengaging during gear changes. Those were 100 times more important to me than any sort of fluid flow chart. Like, are you honestly gonna like watch the fluid travel through the valve body and then go through this? It doesn't matter, it's not important. So that's one of those things you have to do when you're learning is figure out what is extra information that is not important to you when you're trying to diagnose something. Mechanically repairing something is the easy part. I don't know if I've talked about that enough. When I'm showing you guys a lot of these things, I'm showing you mechanical repairs to things because that's a lot of the things that most people can do in their own garages, something like that. A part is a part is a part. You unbolt it, you put another part on. The hard part of any technician's job is diagnostics, and that is where the experience comes in. And so therefore, that is where your technical training really comes in handy. Now, the other huge benefit of technician training is that you're getting together with other techs. Now, you can pool your resources, pool your knowledge. You talk to them, what have you seen lately? What have you dealt with lately? Even if that's not something you're currently seeing, you may see it down the road. And also too, it's just adding to your knowledge base. So to me, the knowledge gained from collaborating with these other technicians was usually even more important than whatever class I was actually there to attend. Now, the last thing I'll mention is if you're working for a job that is willing to pay you to go to technical training, 100% take advantage of that. I don't care how much they're paying you, you are getting paid to go learn. So go do it. All right, you guys, that's going to do it for this episode of Ask a Tech. As always, leave your questions in the pinned comment below. Hopefully I'll get an opportunity to answer that in the next Ask a Tech. We'll see you next time on Reignited.